Welcome to the Calumet Roundtable. I'm your host, Tom Roach. I'm joined today by my guest, Dr. Ralph Cherry. Ralph is an associate professor of sociology at Purdue University Northwest, and he has a Ph.D. from the University of Minnesota. His area of study was the sociology of aging, and he also worked and ran a gerontology center for the university. And I just thought it would be good if we had Ralph in to talk about our 70-year-old president that we just elected. Some people think that his age is a factor, so we're going to go to the expert here and find out what it means to be 70 and be president.
Well, the great news is that it's much better to be 70 now in the year 2017 than it was 100 years ago, when the odds are that you might indeed have a stroke and nobody would know what to do with you.
Right.
About 100 years ago, Wilson had a stroke in 1919, and his wife took care of him. In fact, his wife very nearly ran the country.
Because she was the first woman president, they say.
That's right, that's right. And so I don't think we need to worry about what to do with issues of stroke in the way that we used to. So being 70 now is very different than it was 100 years ago, for that matter, even 50 years ago.
Well, of course, Wilson wasn't anywhere near that old either.
No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't.
I've got some information here on ages of presidents. You know, we used to think of Roosevelt as being this very old president. Of course, he did more than 2 terms. But Roosevelt was only 42 when he took office.
That's right.
Franklin. He had paralysis in both legs.
As a result of polio?
Yes. Eisenhower was 62 when he became president. And I didn't realize this, but apparently he suffered a stroke, had Crohn's disease, and a heart attack.
Eisenhower had an important stroke, a major stroke, a heart attack in 1955. And he was, in a way, incapacitated for a while. Richard Nixon was kind of taking up a lot of the decision making for him. Which, by the way, he used in the process of his electoral campaign in 1960. But in any case, Eisenhower was kind of out of commission for a while, and he continued to be a chain smoker. He continued to do these things, and he had another stroke after having been re-elected in 1956.
Really?
Yeah, and he continued to smoke, and he had another small stroke, in this case, not a heart attack, but a small stroke, and other kinds of heart problems. But he looked in his 60s, arguably, like some people would refer to an old man. In fact, a lot of people thought of him as a grandfather.
Right.
People today might see Bernie Sanders as looking a little bit like a grandfather, but maybe not so much Donald Trump. And I think that's very clearly in Trump's. That's his style. He wants to look virile. And he wants to overcome aging in those kinds of ways.
And I think he pulls that off. You know, people complain about his hairstyle, perhaps, but he doesn't look like somebody who's on his last legs by any means.
No, I think that's part of his MO when he was running for president. He didn't mind looking virile. He made, as you may recall, remarks about his hands and being able to overcome the tininess of his hands.
I never thought of that as a disability, but
he made sure that it wasn't, and I think that was all part of his idea of kind of standing up to anybody who might say, "Well, I'm 70, or this guy is 70, he can't do things." And I think when he was talking with the press about his stamina. He invoked that phrase very deliberately, and he's obviously very proud of that, and arguably he has a lot. And so today's 70 isn't exactly what it was once upon a time.
Right. So, and that's not just true of Trump then, obviously, right?
No. In fact, that illustrates the larger message about aging. If you're studying the physiology and the sociology and the psychology of aging, the larger principle is that variations in the population increase as you go up the age ladder. So that at the age of 20, most all people are able to do things for themselves without a lot of assistance. By the time you get to the age of 65, roughly a quarter of all older people above the age of 65 have a problem with some activity of daily living.
Really?
And that's a lot of people. That's not to say that they can't live independently, but they have some difficulties. And so there's a lot of variation there among the, I think it's pretty clear, President Trump, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, all those people who ran in the last election are very able to carry out the offices that they've been having actually for over the last several years.
Well, when we think of the other, some of the other presidents, Kennedy was 43 when he got elected. His issue was he was too young, as I recall. He had Addison's disease, back issues, colitis, urinary tract infections. He was one of the least healthy, it seems like.
But nobody, or at least very few people, knew that. And that's what's also, I think, really interesting about aging in this context. It's not just a matter of what your health really is, what the fact of your health is. It's a matter of how you are able to portray a certain image of aging.
Well, because we're talking about the political side to all of this, right?
Oh, well, and to be able to disguise. I mean, there's some literature about how people very deliberately, and it's probably understandable as we try to put our best face forward. And if you're a leader of an organization, you don't want to show weakness, I suppose. So you're very careful about how other people are going to see you. And so Kennedy very clearly masked his Addison's disease. And even Franklin Roosevelt, who people knew had polio, was never photographed in a wheelchair. And so there's the fact of aging, and then there's how you portray the image that goes along with it.
Well, and so, Nixon at 49 takes office, so another, case of somebody who's younger by most standards. Possibly some psychological issues there, but no health issues that we know of.
Not that I know.
Physiological issues.
But once again, you might say that his behavior a little bit later in office might certainly have been an issue of stress.
Perhaps.
And honestly, one of the things that any president has to deal with is how are they going to deal with stress? Because if you look at some of the killers of people at any age, how they handle stress varies widely.
So would you say it's good to avoid stress as you get older, to not take positions as like, television interviewers or department heads or things like that?
Well, I would say that it's important to have a certain amount of stress in your life. That's probably just fine. And how you are able to overcome these things is a different issue. But because that's a tip-off to how engaged you are. To be engaged, whether or not you're the president of the United States or simply a private citizen somewhere in Hammond, Indiana, you need to be engaged. You need to have people with whom you can talk.
And I don't know if this is just a myth, but there seems to be this sense that sometimes people deteriorate more quickly after they retire. Is there any statistical support for that? It just seems like you hear stories about somebody retired and 2 weeks later, has a stroke or a heart attack and is gone.
Well, you can always ask what is causing what at that point. Because part of the reason why some people retire is because indeed they had in fact, that's one of the biggest reasons why people will retire early. That is to say, before they really want to. Assuming that they have a job, a lot of people have to retire due to issues of health and just being able to continue to carry out the job.
Well, and that statistic you just gave us about people over 60, right? And so before we go to the break, the last president I wanted to mention was Reagan, and Reagan's age was a big issue when he was running for president. But he was only 69 when so a year off of Trump, maybe just a few months. But he was 69 when he took office.
That's
and people were very concerned, and then we reelected him, right?
That's right.
But Reagan had bladder issues, precancerous polyps, I understand, and of course he was the oldest president before we elected Trump.
Yes.
But Reagan did have some other issues, right? Didn't he? There was some concern that when he'd gone into those negotiations with Gorbachev, that he perhaps wasn't really tracking things that well.
A lot of people had concerns about that. Having said that, he He seemed to follow through effectively enough.
Yeah.
But a number of people, with those negotiations, also with when the entire Iran-Contra controversy,
right.
And Oliver North and all the rest of those, the people who were involved with that, became public, Reagan genuinely seemed a little unnerved and befuddled by what was going on. He didn't seem to quite know what to do with that. And some people looked at that and began to whisper.
Yeah.
And the whisperings in Washington are really kind of serious, because they signal that, well, maybe there are realities here, and people form allegiances against you in some cases, and begin to wonder just how effective you are.
Yeah, lose confidence.
Yeah, they lose confidence. That's a good way of putting it.
Of course, Reagan also was shot while he was in office,
and
seemed to
probably
not recover
was
very quickly from that. Yeah.
Well, yes, and yet that earned him a lot of wait time in terms of the public. The public really appreciated how he came back, and how he had a sense of humor in the process.
Right, right. Yeah, there were all the stories going around about the jokes he was cracking on his way to the hospital.
Right.
Yeah.
Reagan also did one other thing in terms of the image of aging, because in the 1984 election against Walter Mondale, the issue of age famously came up, and one of the great quips in debate history. Walter Mondale was trying to make age an issue.
Yeah. And
Reagan just famously said, "Well, I will not make age an issue. I will not make an issue of my opponent's youth and inexperience." and people started laughing, and nobody else brought it up.
Yeah.
However many things he said wrong or incorrectly or whatever. But he won the debate, you might say.
Yeah, well, he won the election.
And he won the election,
as I recall.
that's right.
Yeah, both times, at least electorally. Would you say that age was a factor, or just generally health was a factor for some of these other presidents? Because we look at the most complicated issue. It was probably Roosevelt's polio situation, right? But then you've got Wilson, who's incapacitated while he's in office. Not all that old at the time. I don't know Wilson's age, but
I think he was in his 60s.
Yeah,
but what you see in both Franklin Delano Roosevelt and actually more recently in Barack Obama, and really dramatically with Obama, is the changing of their appearance.
Okay, well, we're going to take a quick break, and the Calumet Roundtable will be right back. You were on the air at WXRT, I think, the day John Lennon died, right?
Yeah, I was.
And that was during your broadcast, am I right?
It was, but it was a specialized broadcast called This Week in Chicago.
One of the things that was noted when you look across the country, that Chicago has a much higher incidence of police shootings than others. So let me ask you this, is it because Chicago is a more violent community? Does Chicago have more people that confront police in a way that's not done the same way in New York or LA?
Do you think you look at things differently than other musicians because of your own experience?
One of the beauties is people say conductors live because they're doing this all the time.
Yeah.
I think conductors live a long time because you're just growing.
Welcome back to the Calumet Roundtable. I'm your host, Tom Roach. My guest today is Dr. Ralph Cherry. Ralph's Ph.D. is in the sociology of aging, and we were talking about what it means to be 70 and how this might be impacting our president and the rest of us. Ralph, one of the main issues is the impact of stress on aging. Can you give me a little overview of that? Why do we worry about stress more when we're older?
Well, stress at the cellular level leads to changing chromosomes at the most literal kind of way. It's been associated with shortening the telomeres that compose the genetics of aging. And what that means is that the reproductions of our cells can begin to occur less effectively. And so if we're not producing and reproducing the cells within our body, it leads to problems at a variety of different organ systems.
So in other words, you're saying if you're in stressful situations, it impacts you at a cellular level all over your body?
I think so.
Really?
But that assumes that you don't have aids to help you work with stress. That is to say, both people around you as well as your own coping strategies and in some cases some resources that can assist you with how you can work in the context of your own life. To deal with problems that you have.
So for example, what are some coping strategies that are commonly referred to?
If you think about somebody who's younger versus somebody who's older, who has money problems, for example, and a lot of people do. People who are younger may have relatively fewer resources or in terms of social resources to fall back upon, whereas people who are older may have first of all some knowledge about where else you might be able to go to obtain the funds or some resources to keep on doing things.
So you're worried about these things, and that's
well, that's an issue.
That's constantly.
You also more than likely have other people with whom you can talk. And so the classic discussion among any number of people who get to be beyond the age of 65, 70, certainly 75, is to talk about issues of aging. That is to say, issues of your health. And what you do when you have some kind of torn whatever or a problem with your heart, and so you wind up comparing notes.
So the other health issues contribute to the stress, and then it sort of like multiplies out, right?
Well, it might, but ideally you're able to talk with other people and both get some commiseration. I mean, other people kind of know what you're going through. And sometimes you find out, well, okay, I can go to that doctor, and maybe that doctor can help me when that doctor over there didn't.
Well, so, I'm just saying, if you're 70 years old, would you want to be president? Does that sound like a good idea if you're concerned about stress?
You wouldn't think so, and yet some people still have a lot to prove. That was, I think, one of the most remarkable things about the last election. You had three people. Hillary Clinton was 69, as I recall.
Right, that's right.
Donald Trump is 70. Bernie Sanders was 73. And the issue of age didn't come up in the way that it used to come up.
They were all within about 5 years of one another.
That's right. So you had relatively less to choose from in that regard. You didn't have any younger person who, such as, for example, Barack Obama, when he ran for office. So the choices for a younger person at the time were limited. But those are the three people that rose to the top of their respective campaigns.
And another issue is social relationships. What's the impact of your relationships on the aging process?
Well, any number of studies indicates that social relationships lessen the effect of stress. Social relationships build kind of both an instrumental ability to find some resources around you. For example, as I was just mentioning regarding, who the better doctor might be. But beyond that, it gives you kind of a comfort zone for your own life. Social relationships are really valuable in terms of providing a sense of home, a sense of well-being. And that's something a lot of people talk about, but it's not so easy to achieve when you're on your own. It's one of the illustrations of why the recently widowed, for example, at whatever age, but especially when you get to be a little bit older, those people who are widowed are at real risk of health problems.
Really?
Oh yeah, they are at much greater risk of becoming, well, for example, not eating properly, and included with that are issues of including hydration and water. It's one of the reasons why older people who are widowed are more likely to go to the hospital, because they're not taking care of themselves.
Interesting.
And insofar as they're their particular social relationship of their spouse was the person. That's true for males and females. They're often really affected really negatively.
Well, I guess over a period of time in a relationship, people tend to take on certain roles and responsibilities for the other person, right? And you withdraw that all of a sudden. And
you draw upon the interdependencies of a relationship, whether or not it's a marital relationship or a relationship that you simply have been in for a long time.
Yeah.
And people draw upon that. And when that other person is no longer with you, you're really affected.
So when I think about that, though, I think of having to sort of reinvent yourself, right? Reapply yourself and rethink how you're interacting with others and what you're doing with your life. Are you less capable of making those adjustments when you get into your 70s? Is that a factor?
Well, I'll put it this way. Anybody who, in the context of widowhood, is something that you mentioned, or that I mentioned earlier, it takes a while for people to recover, for people to make that adjustment.
Yeah.
And
not that we find it easy to adjust anyway, but yes.
No, but in the context of somebody who, well, for example, might need to make decisions about their life, they often need some guidance or some people who are looking in on and just talk with them, broach the issue of what it is that they're going to do with their housing situation. Are they going to continue to live by themselves, and in what kind of way?
But is the ability to adjust, flexibility, is that a cognitive issue? I know, for instance, we all lose some memory capacity starting at age 40, which is a lot earlier than most people would expect, right?
True.
So what's what's the brain like at 70 on the average? How is that different from a 30-year-old brain?
Well, imagine a really fast computer. It's easy to do that nowadays because we have phones that are faster than our computers used to be 40 years ago. But if you appreciate the processing speed of a computer, younger people have higher processing speed. They can do any number of mental calculations faster. That said, older people frequently are able to compensate in terms of what's sometimes referred to as memory pragmatics. They come up with new ways of remembering things. They handle the fact that they might not be able to remember everything by guess what, forming lists. And in the process, simply the process of writing these, whatever is on the list down, they embed or encode those things. So you're able to remember a lot. You're also able to do a lot, and certain kinds of skills, musical skills, for example, as well as even arithmetic skills, the ability to add and subtract, don't seem to diminish with age, especially if you keep those skills going. So you can have famous piano players, for example, who continue to amaze because they adjust their style. I mean, that's part of the age pragmatics that go along with the ability to cope.
Well, is there some advantage to being 70? Do you gain something at 70 that you gain something as you get older that you don't have when you're younger?
The answer,
other than knowledge, right?
The answer is clearly yes. Amazingly, people who are 70 tend to be happier than people who are in their 50s.
Really?
Or in their 30s. Yeah. They tend to be happier. If you ask them about their lives, they often indicate that not just that they're happier, and there are various reasons why they might be. Among other things, they've made it this far, and they know that that they want to get things out of life, and they have to appreciate what life there is to have. Having said that, they have their own reference point for assessing their health. If you ask a lot of people who are 70 years old, what's the status of your health? Excellent, good, fair, or poor? A stunning number of people will say excellent, excellent or good. And that's always surprises younger people who would look at this other person and say, wait a minute, this person is 70. They can't run as fast as I can. They can't climb the steps like I can. They can't, all those kinds of things. And yet, the comparison point that the older person has is, guess what? Other people around him or her. And those comparison points are often, well, they often match up pretty favorably to those people that they're around.
Yeah, you're only looking
and so the cognitive
stage.
That's right. So in that regard, older people are frequently happier. They've learned to address a lot of the challenges that younger people don't have those capacities to handle.
What about wisdom? You know, in common, you know, usage, right? We think of people being older and wiser. Is there any, you know, scientific justification for saying that we're wiser when we get older? Is there any way of looking at this from your point of view?
Well, apart from scratching your head and looking ponderous
and looking wiser,
there's some reason to think that somebody who is a little bit older and has a certain amount of resources can look upon their situation and try to assess it from a different vantage. Partly because in some cases they may not be in the race in the same way, enmeshed in the race in the same way that a younger person might really be as he or she is striving and trying to accomplish things and raising a family and having a job and making it to work and back in a given day.
So that's sort of circumstantial, though. I mean, it's not that there's nothing physiologically that would make someone wiser as they're aging, right? It's not a chemical shift or...
No, and of course, no, it's not
just
that.
circumstantial mostly.
And partly it always depends upon how you define wisdom. And that's always the challenge for that particular term, even though you can appreciate that somebody who has lived a certain set of decades in life has a certain perspective on what has gone on in the past and how the present compares with previous decades. You know, now, once again, somebody who is president at the age of 70, you know, has better options for health care and health and so forth than somebody did, you know, 100 years ago.
Very good. That is all the time we have for our program. Thank you to Dr. Ralph Cherry for joining me today on the Calumet Roundtable. I'm your host, Tom Roach. Have a great day.